3 years ago, I left my full-time job as an in-house designer to pursue building a business of my own. Along the way, there's been plenty of ups and downs, but as I reflect back on my journey, I noticed there was one life-altering thing that could have prevented me from achieving any of it. And I believe if you conquer this, your chances of success increase dramatically. So let's take a look at my journey and discover exactly what that was so we can stop it from coming between you and your goals. Throughout the video, I'll be using clips from a podcast I recently appeared on. I'll leave a link to both the podcast and episode down below for those interested. So I first noticed this problem surface when I decided to start taking my business goals seriously. But to understand why this emerged, we first need to understand how my business came to be.
Yeah. Can you fill people in on kind of how you got to being a full-time designer?
So I started my business in, I'd say 2019. So I was working full-time as a graphic designer for like another company. I kind of just started my business as a side hustle just to earn some extra cash. And then lockdown happened. I got furloughed. All of a sudden, I had all of this free time. I remember at the start of lockdown, I had 2 weeks where I was a slob. I was literally just like sat there watching Netflix for 2 weeks. And I was like, I need to sort my life out. Like, what am I doing? Like, honestly, what am I doing with my life? I've got a business that I started. I've got so much time now to actually try and make it something. So I was like, right, let's kind of write a plan out of what I can do. Let's see if I can make this something whilst I've got this free time, because obviously I wasn't working. So I just put all of my energy like into social media. I was like, we're going to start designing. We're going to try and get as many clients as we can. After, I'd say 3 months, I had so many inquiries, lots of clients coming in, lots of referrals, and got to the point where I got unfurloughed and I had to go back to work, and I was like I can't have all of these clients. I can't do full-time work. And I think it was about a month into going back full-time, I was like, I can't do this. So I actually went down to part-time with my full-time job, which then gave me that extra free time to then work with these clients that I had built up over lockdown. And then literally a week later, I had to go back to work and be like, yeah, I can't do this anymore. Handed my notice in, gave a week, and then I went full-time.
So it all sounds like it was going pretty well, right? And while for the most part it was, after I made that move from employee to full-time business owner, I noticed the problem started to become more prominent in my life. It would stop me from doing certain things and would play on my mind for hours. To know why I was experiencing this negative feeling, we have to acknowledge the difference between agency and freelance work.
Like with my old job, I was a graphic designer, but looking back in hindsight now, I actually realised that that job held me back. Didn't realise it at the time, but it was very limited. And I think a lot of designers, if they're in a full-time job, they might understand this, but when you're working kind of either for an agency or within a company, you have to stick to strict rules. You have to stick to guidelines. You have to stick to a certain design style within that company. And for me, I had no idea what my design style was. I had no idea who I was as a designer. So until I broke out of that and started running my own business, that is when I finally figured out, like, I'm this new designer. I've got this style that I didn't even know that I had. So it was such a kind of breakthrough.
Now, what I just mentioned was for sure a positive. Being able to work for yourself and get the chance to be creatively free was great. But the thing that often comes with freedom is pressure. And this pressure was only amplifying the problem I was dealing with. See, at the start of my journey, I was scared my style wasn't good enough and that clients wouldn't like my work. Even though eventually I managed to overcome these thoughts, I didn't address the core problem I was facing, which in a few months came back to trouble me again. But before we move on to that, we need to know how I dealt with the first issue of not feeling good enough, as this will help us discover the root of the problem later down the road.
I know there's a whole conversation in a lot of industries, but especially with designers, of like, do you need a degree and are you qualified to do what you do?
Yeah.
And I know that's something you're really passionate about, is kind of opening the space and not gatekeeping it to like, you need to tick these boxes in order to operate here. Is that something you experienced at the start, that kind of imposter syndrome of, oh gosh, do I kind of deserve to be here?
I think even now, I think I deal with that imposter syndrome. Like, every designer is going to go through it. I think you just have to embrace it and realize you're going to have these feelings. I always think, like, I don't want to regret things. I don't want to think that I've missed out on opportunities because I was too scared. I would rather be scared, try it. If it doesn't work, doesn't work. I tried.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be feeling like regretful of the things that I've done. So
it's such a good attitude. And I think when you really think about it, like what's the fear of? Especially when it comes to online, the businesses we run, we're not saving lives. Like, what is the worst thing that's going to happen?
I know.
Something will flop and no one will probably care.
I think it's more in our heads. Like we build up this vision of the things that could go wrong, when actually we need to think about, okay, what can go right? What happens if I do this? Like, what can be the outcome, instead of focusing on those cons?
So after I overcame not feeling good enough, I continued to grow my business, and after a few months, I came to a crossroads. And you guessed it, that is where the core problem popped up again. See, I didn't want to just be a freelance designer. I wanted to be one that stood out. And I knew to achieve this, I'd have to do things that people weren't doing, which meant getting uncomfortable. So after having a chat with my partner, here's what we decided would give me a winning edge.
Well, when was it that you realised, okay, in order to build a community, I've got to connect them to me? Because the easy thing to do, right, is to go, here's my work, I'll hide behind my services.
Yeah. So this comes down to actually my partner, which obviously we'll get to it in a bit. When I started my business, I'd post stuff, it would get like 10 likes. Like it was awful. My posts back then were just awful. There was no engagement. And he said one day, because obviously I had the free time in lockdown, he was like, start talking on your stories. Start putting your face out there, because right now, how many design accounts do you see and how many people do you know behind those accounts? And I said, yeah, you're right. Like, I don't know. It feels like when designers post work, it's very robotic. I don't actually know who it is. I don't know anything about them. I just see their work. And then, I set myself a goal. I was like, right, if I can do this for a month, let's just see what happens. So I was like, right, we're going to talk on my stories. We're going to show up every single day and I'm just going to see what happens. And that was the moment that my Instagram started taking off, because people started to see my account as a person and not just a design account. They got to know me. They could see what I was getting up to in my day. And that's when I started kind of interacting with a lot more designers. And from that, it skyrocketed.
This decision to show my face and start building a community was probably one of the best decisions I could have made for my business. But it was tainted by the negative feelings and thoughts I had leading up to that decision. See, at the time, I just thought it was natural nerves that you get from doing something unknown. But looking back now, it was that same core problem that almost stopped me from doing client work because I didn't feel good enough. In hindsight, it might have actually been better if it did stop me, because I would have had to deal with the problem there and then. But unknowingly, I continued on with my business, and soon enough, it plagued my mind once again. So fast forward a year, I had a constant stream of clients, built an amazing community, and the business was growing. This was when I made the decision to level up. But in fact, it wasn't my decision at all. See, the problem I had been dealing with throughout my design journey had subconsciously put this idea forward in my mind to mask the fear of being judged. So we can finally identify what that big problem was. Let's first recognize the idea.
What have some of those challenges been, or kind of the behind the scenes that maybe people haven't seen?
If you're in my newsletter, you will probably know about this, but I don't think I've spoken about this anywhere else. So it was last year, I'd probably say around March time. I decided that the right thing and the next thing for the business was to turn it into an agency. So I was going down the route of no more being a personal brand. I felt this pressure to kind of be bigger, be better. And for me, I felt like running an agency was that. So I would get some designers in, because I had clients coming to me and I had to kind of turn them away because I was so busy. And I thought, right, if I turn this into an agency, I can get some designers, I'll get some web developers, I can run a business, I can kind of be in charge of that and build this empire. 3 months later, I'd built the website, I'd done the branding, we had a conversation about the next steps of how we were going to kind of run this agency.
Putting together job descriptions.
Literally, we'd got to the end point where I was about a month away from launching this new business and this new design agency. And Jack, my partner, kind of sat me down one day and was just like, is this you? Like, is this what you want to do? And I went in defense mode. I was like, of course it's what I want to do. What are you on about? I've been doing this for 3 months. Like, this is exactly what I want to do. And then half an hour later, I sat down and I'd taken everything he'd said in. Because obviously he's got my best intentions. He knows me. He's with me a lot. He knows what I wanted for the future. I'm running an agency, had never been in it. So I'd sat down with my thoughts and I was like, this is not me. I've been pressured into this by social media. I'd seen a lot of other people doing this. Started running an agency and I thought, I can do that. That's what I want to do. I've got to be bigger and better. And that's the next steps for me. When in fact, it literally has never been my dream to run an agency. I couldn't think of anything worse than running, being in charge of people.
Yeah.
I like the freedom that I have now of working with clients, not having to worry and go back and forth with the designers. And yeah, I felt this intense pressure to perform and do better and bring something else into it. So I kind of went through that. And obviously I'd been working on this for 3 months.
Yeah.
And when you work on something, you don't want to give it up. You feel bad because you're like, it's wasted time. Why have I been doing that? So I was so attached to this project and the next steps that I'd kind of had in my head for these past 3 months that I didn't want to let go, which is why I went into that defense mode. And then me and Jack had another conversation and I realized that I didn't want to do it and I had to scrap it, and letting that go was so hard because I'd been planning it for so long.
This was the first time in my design career that I actually realised what the problem was and how it had caused me several issues through the years. See, it would always pop up when it came to a big decision or doing something unknown. And that problem was my fear of failure. But now we knew the problem, how did I solve it? Well, there were 3 things. The first was this.
It's that kind of shoulder-dropping moment, isn't it? When you realise, oh gosh, growth and success doesn't have to look like bigger and better.
Yeah.
It's that pressure, and you're right, it comes from the external space and what we think everyone is thinking we should do and what others are doing, where we assume, okay, if I want to grow, that means that numbers need to be up. Okay, I'm fully booked, so what does that mean? Okay, great, now I start an agency.
Yeah.
And growth can look like scaling a business back.
The way that success is measured is so different for everyone. And for me, I really fell into that trap of feeling pressured to have something bigger and better when actually in hindsight, it wasn't right for me. And I'm so glad that Jack had sat me down and said this to me, because if he hadn't, I will hold my hands up and say I'm really bad at being self-aware, and I will just continue with stuff until I'm actually sat down by someone and they tell me. So that's something I need to improve on. But yeah, if that hadn't had happened, I think I'd be so unhappy right now if I was running an agency.
But probably to everyone else,
yeah,
it'll be like, oh, Abby's smashing it.
See, I needed to define what success meant to me and not let the fear of people's judgment or expectations alter that. I never wanted an agency, but the fear of not growing my business and being judged for that made me think I wanted to. The next thing I did to prevent fear ruining my business was adopt this mindset.
The thing that got me through is I know within my journey, as long as I just start, every time I do something, I get better. And you're not going to be perfect when you start. No one is perfect. Everyone that you see that are incredible at their craft, they didn't start off incredible. They started off as a beginner like every single other person. But what they did is they just started. And that's exactly what I've done with the things that I've accomplished is I just started. I didn't give a shit about if I was good enough, if I was perfect enough, if I had the right equipment. I used my phone for 6 months to record my YouTube videos. I didn't have the right equipment. I didn't have the right lighting. I didn't have the right setup, but I started, I learned, I figured out, okay, I made that mistake. I got the right equipment, did this, did that. And then that's how you progress. You don't need to be perfect. And yes, everyone is going to be scared when they start, but you have to embrace that. You have to just get on and start.
Now I understood that it was fear that was causing these negative emotions and making me apprehensive about trying new stuff. I knew that I had to adopt a different mindset if I wanted to be successful. The last and probably most important thing I did to not only prevent fear, but to also ensure that if it arose again, I could deal with it, was this.
So let's talk about Jack.
We've been speaking about.
Gosh, this man's got a lot of airtime in this episode.
He's not even here.
Been alluded to. It's men take over everything, Abby, honestly. So obviously Jack was helping you behind the scenes as just a partner, and like you said, giving you kind of tips, advice. I'm sure he'd love to hear that he is to credit for getting your Instagram story. Cut this bit out. Yeah. But you've recently made the kind of public announcement that he's now running the business with you.
Yes.
Tell me more about that. How do you go from this is my business, you're my partner, to actually now we are partners, not just in life, but in business as well?
So he has always been there behind the scenes. Like when I started the business and went through all of that in lockdown, he has always been there supporting me, pushing me, helping me with turning into a personal brand and giving me like really good business advice. So whilst through lockdown as well, so he was working for the NHS as a video editor, so he was helping me on the side as well. And then when was it? I'd say the start of the year, we kind of started having a conversation about the business and where it could go. We really wanted to focus on YouTube this year as being like the main priority, and it got to the point where he wasn't just editing anymore. It didn't make sense for him to not be within the business. There was a lot behind the scenes that he was doing that was helping.
See, the last thing I did was surround myself with like-minded people. Yes, in this example, it happens to be my partner, but having people around you that have strengths where your weaknesses are is so key. This relates to fear a lot, because if I'm letting it control me, Jack gives me perspective on the whole situation, which helps me deal with it. If you let it, fear can swallow you up. And before you know it, it's stopped you taking potentially life-changing opportunities. One thing I like to do is face fear head on and do things that scare me. That's why in this video, I challenge 4 pro designers to a logo contest. Take a look and see how I did.